38 years, I believed I had built something worth protecting. A home with yellow curtains, I sewed myself. A yard where my husband taught our daughter to ride a bicycle on a Saturday morning while I watched from the porch with coffee going cold in my hands. A marriage that had survived job losses, a miscarriage we never talked about enough, and the particular loneliness of two people who love each other but sometimes forget to say so. I was 63 years old, and I thought the hard parts were behind us. I was wrong about that. My husband's name is Eugene. We met at a church picnic in 1986 when I was 25 and he was 27, and neither of us was looking for anything. He handed me a paper plate that was about to collapse under the weight of potato salad and said, "You're going to lose that in about 4 seconds." I laughed. We talked until the mosquitoes drove everyone inside. We were married 11 months later. Our daughter Noella was born 3 years after our wedding. She was a serious child, always watching, always thinking before she spoke. Teachers loved her. She had Eugene's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and for most of her childhood, those two things combined into something that looked a lot like determination. She graduated near the top of her class, got a scholarship to a good school, called home every Sunday for the first 2 years. Somewhere in her late 20s, the Sunday calls became monthly calls, then occasional calls, then calls that always seemed to have a reason behind them, never just to talk, always to mention something, ask something, need something. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up, they get busy. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who complained about that. She married a man named Griffin. No, wait, I need to stop myself. That's not his name. His name was Lester. I've trained myself to think of him a certain way now, and sometimes the wrong words come out. Lester came into our lives when Noelle was 31. He was handsome in that careful way, the kind of handsome that comes from paying close attention to how he looked, rather than just being born with it. Good clothes. A firm handshake. He laughed at Eugene's jokes, which Eugene appreciated more than he should have. I tried to like him. I did like him for a while. Or I liked the idea of him, which I think is a different thing. They got married in the fall of 2019, and I cried at the wedding the way mothers are supposed to cry, and I meant it. I wanted her to be happy. I wanted everything for her that she wanted for herself. The first sign of something wrong didn't look like a sign at all. It looked like a reasonable request. Noelle called, a Sunday call, which already felt strange, and said that she and Lester were looking at a business opportunity. A small restaurant concept, she said. Something they'd been researching for 2 years. The timing was right, the location was right, but they needed startup capital that the bank wasn't willing to provide in full. She didn't ask directly at first. She just described it. That was how she'd always operated, laying things out, letting you come to your own conclusion, which was usually the conclusion she'd already decided on. Eugene looked at me after we hung up. "She wants money," he said. "She wants us to offer," I said. We offered $40,000, which was not nothing to us. It was a piece of Eugene's retirement account, liquidated early, which meant penalties, which meant it cost us closer to $50,000 by the time it was done. We didn't tell her that part. We wired the money and told her we believed in her, and that was the end of the conversation. The restaurant opened, and for about 8 months Noelle sent us pictures, meals on white plates, a chalkboard menu, Lester behind the bar looking like he belonged there. We visited once and sat at a corner table and felt proud in that specific way parents feel proud. Not quite like it's yours, but close to it. Then the pictures stopped. When I asked how things were going, Noelle said, "Fine." In the tone of voice that means the opposite, I didn't push. Another mistake in a long list of them. About 14 months after we gave them the money, Noelle called again on a Tuesday, which was wrong immediately. She explained that the restaurant had struggled. Pandemic-related losses, this was early 2021, supply chain issues, a lease that had become untenable. They were going to have to close. She was sorry. She knew what it had cost us. I believed her. That part I believed. What she said next was that they had a plan to recover. Not a restaurant this time. Real estate. A single property, a flip. Something Lester had experience with from a previous career chapter I had never quite understood. They needed a smaller amount this time, just $22,000 to cover the down payment gap, they'd pay us back within 18 months with interest. I looked at Eugene while she was talking. Something on his face was different than usual. Tighter, somehow. He nodded at me, which I interpreted as yes, but later he told me he meant something else entirely. He meant, "I'll explain afterward." He didn't explain afterward. He went quiet in the way he gets quiet when he's thinking something he hasn't finished thinking yet. And I, because I am impatient and because I had already decided, called Noelle back the next morning and told her we'd help. We sent the $22,000. The 18 months passed, then 24 months. I asked twice about repayment and got answers that were technically responses. Things about market conditions, about timing, about how they hadn't forgotten, without being actual answers. I stopped asking because asking made me feel like a creditor, and I was her mother, and those two roles didn't fit together in my chest at the same time. Eugene started doing things I didn't notice until later. He started keeping a separate notebook. He started spending time at the computer late at night when he thought I was asleep. He started asking questions when Noelle called, small questions, careful questions, the kind that don't sound like questions at all unless you know what you're listening for. I didn't know what I was listening for. In the spring of last year, we celebrated our 38th anniversary. Eugene took me to the inn on the lake, about 2 hours from our house, the same inn where we'd spent a weekend on our 15th anniversary, and promised ourselves we'd come back every year, which we'd done exactly 3 times in 23 years. He made the reservation without telling me. He packed a bag for me while I was at my sister's house and put it in the car before I got home, so I wouldn't have a chance to say we shouldn't spend the money. We drove up on a Friday afternoon in April. The trees were just starting to come back. There's that particular green of early spring that doesn't last more than 2 weeks, and I never remember to pay enough attention to it until it's already gone. That afternoon, I paid attention. Eugene held my hand across the center console for most of the drive. He was quiet, but it was a different quiet than the notebook and computer quiet. It felt like the quiet of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it. I asked him what was on his mind. He said, "I've been doing some research." I said, "About what?" He said, "About Noelle and Lester." I want to tell you I was surprised. I want to tell you that what he said next came from nowhere. But there's a part of me, the part that watched her face when she said fine in that tone, the part that noticed Eugene's notebook, the part that woke up at 3 a.m. sometimes for no reason I could name. That part of me had been sitting with a dread I refused to acknowledge for almost 2 years. Eugene had contacted a private financial investigator, not a detective, he clarified, because he knew how that would sound. A financial specialist who helps people understand where money has gone. He'd been working with this person for 4 months. The restaurant, it turned out, had not lost money in the way Noelle described. It had been dissolved intentionally, its remaining assets liquidated and moved into an LLC that Lester had formed 8 months before the restaurant closed. The $40,000 we gave them was traceable, in part, to that LLC. The real estate deal had never existed. The $22,000 had gone directly into a joint account that was in Lester's name, and a name I didn't recognize. A woman whose connection to Lester the investigator was still untangling when Eugene decided he'd heard enough to talk to me. I didn't cry at first. I sat in the passenger seat of our car on a 2-lane road with spring trees on both sides, and I felt absolutely nothing, which I now understand was my mind protecting me from feeling everything at once. "How long have you known?" I asked. "I've suspected for almost 2 years, he said. "I've known for certain for about 6 weeks. Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't ready to watch you go through it." I have thought about that sentence many times since then, whether it was love or control or some combination of the two that doesn't have a clean name. I think it was love. I also think it cost us something that we needed to have earlier. We checked into the inn. We sat on the small balcony that overlooked the water, and Eugene ordered wine, and I drank mine faster than I usually do. We talked for 4 hours. We ordered room service instead of going down to dinner. We talked about what to do, whether to confront Noelle, whether to involve lawyers, whether there was some version of this we hadn't understood yet, some explanation that would make it make sense. Eugene had already spoken to a lawyer, quietly, carefully, without telling me. There were options. But the lawyer had also said something that Eugene had been turning over. In situations like this, when confrontation happens before legal action is secured, assets tend to disappear. We agreed to go home Sunday and call an attorney together Monday morning. We did not get home Sunday. Noelle called Saturday morning while we were at breakfast. She had known through my sister, who had known through no one's fault, just casual conversation, that Eugene and I were at the inn for our anniversary. She said she and Lester wanted to come up and surprise us, take us to dinner, celebrate. I looked at Eugene across the table. His face did the tight thing again. I said that would be lovely. I don't know, even now, what I expected from that afternoon. Some part of me thought we might sit down at dinner and I might look at my daughter's face and find something there that made the investigator's report feel wrong. Some part of me wanted to be wrong more than I wanted to be right. She was my child. She had been serious and careful and good, and something had changed her, or maybe Lester had changed her, or maybe I had missed something essential about who she'd always been. They arrived around 2. Lester was wearing a jacket. He brought flowers, which he handed to me at the door of our room with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, though I only noticed that later when I replayed it. We walked the trail around the lake that afternoon. It was Lester's suggestion. He said the inn was famous for the view from the North Ridge. I hadn't been on that trail before. Eugene hadn't either. Neither of us had reason to think about that. The path narrows near the ridge. You go single file through a rocky section and then it opens up onto a wide limestone shelf that overlooks the water below. The drop is steep, not a cliff face like you might picture, but a sharp angled slope of loose rock and roots that ends at the lake, maybe 60, 70 feet down. I was standing at the edge looking out. Eugene was beside me. Noelle was to my left. Lester was behind us. What happened next took about 4 seconds. I felt 2 hands on my back, flat-palmed, and then I was not standing anymore. I don't remember the fall itself. I remember the edge, and then I remember being on my side on a slope of loose rock, moving, trying to grab something, not finding anything, and then a thick root from some tree I couldn't see, and my right arm hooking around it without me deciding to. I stopped. I was maybe 40 feet down. Below me, the slope continued to the water. I couldn't hear anything for a moment. Then I heard Eugene, close to me in the dark of the slope, and he was speaking very quietly. "Don't make a sound," he said. "Don't move. I need you to be very still." I turned my head and he was 3 feet from me, holding on to a different root, his face scraped and pale. "What?" I started. "Shh." His voice was almost nothing. "They're still up there. I can hear them." I listened. Above us, on the ridge, I could hear Lester's voice, calm, unhurried. He was talking on a phone. He was saying words I couldn't fully make out, but the tone was the tone of someone describing something routine. Then footsteps, moving away. Eugene waited 7 minutes. He counted them aloud in a whisper, almost to himself, 1 number every 60 seconds. I held on to the root and listened to him count and tried to keep my breathing from shaking too much. When he reached 7, he looked at me. "Can you climb?" My right shoulder felt wrong. My knees were bleeding. "Yes," I said. We climbed. It took us longer than 7 minutes to get back to the ridge. Eugene went first and pulled me up the last section with both hands. We did not speak. At the top, he took out his phone and dialed 911, and while he was talking, I sat on the limestone shelf and looked out at the lake and tried to understand that my daughter had just tried to kill me. I could not understand it. I still can't, not fully. There is a part of the mind that refuses to complete certain sentences. The police found Noelle and Lester at a restaurant 4 miles from the inn. They had ordered appetizers. Lester's phone showed calls made from the ridge. He had called a number that the investigators later identified as belonging to an attorney, not the criminal kind. The estate planning kind. He had already contacted someone about Eugene's and my assets before driving back to town to order calamari. The charges that followed were serious. Attempted murder 2 counts, conspiracy, fraud charges from the financial investigation which had been submitted to law enforcement the previous week. Eugene had been further along in the process than he'd told me, which I understood later as another form of protection that also happened to be a form of exclusion. Noelle hired a lawyer within hours of her arrest. She did not call me. She did not ask for me. I have turned that over more times than I can count, the not calling. And I don't know whether to read it as guilt or calculation or simply the final confirmation that whoever she had become, she had moved so far from the person I raised that the distance was now total. Lester's attorney tried to make the fall sound like an accident. The physical evidence disagreed. The angle of contact, the positioning, the phone records, the financial fraud that established motive. It disagreed clearly and completely. They both accepted plea agreements earlier this year. Noelle received 6 years. Lester received 9, which is longer because the fraud originated from structures he created and controlled. 6 years is not very long, some people have told me. I don't know how to think about length of time in this context. 6 years, 12 years, at the end of it she will be out, and I will have to decide what that means. I haven't gotten there yet. What I have gotten to is this. Eugene and I went back to the inn in February. We asked for the same room. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because I needed to put a different memory on top of the old one. Or maybe because I needed to look at that lake without shaking and find out if I could. I could. We walked the trail again, just the two of us. We stopped before the rocky section where the path narrows and stood there for a moment. Eugene took my hand. "We don't have to," he said. "I know," I said, and I walked through anyway. The limestone shelf looks different in February. Quieter. The lake is flat and gray, and you can see further into it somehow. I stood at the edge, not too close, but close enough to look, and I thought about the version of myself who stood here 8 months ago and still believed she knew her daughter. I've done a lot of grieving for that version of myself. She was not stupid or naive, even though the part of me that's still angry wants to blame her for something. She loved her child and trusted her because those two things had always been the same action, and then they weren't, and she didn't adjust quickly enough. Eugene stood beside me and we looked at the water together, and I thought, 38 years is a long time to know someone. It is also not enough time to know everything. There are parts of Eugene I had to learn again after all of this. The parts of him that investigated quietly for 2 years without telling me. The parts that counted to 7 out loud while I held a root on a rock face. The parts that pre-packed my bag for an anniversary trip because he wanted to give me one more good weekend before everything fell apart. I'm still deciding how I feel about all of it. What I know is this. I am 63 years old, and I have a daughter who tried to kill me for money, and a husband who held my hand on a gray lake in February, and a right shoulder that still aches when the weather changes. I know that I grieve Noelle, not the woman who stood on that ridge, but the serious, careful girl who used to call on Sundays, and whose voice on the phone used to feel like something I'd earned. I do not know where that girl went or whether she was ever entirely real, and I suspect I will be working on that question for the rest of my life. I know that I am still here. I am still here, and the spring is coming again, and in 2 weeks those trees will be the particular green that only lasts a moment before it changes into something ordinary, and this time I intend to pay attention. People ask me sometimes whether I saw it coming. They want a clean answer, yes or no, because a clean answer would mean the world still makes a certain kind of sense. If I saw it coming, then I could have stopped it, and if I could have stopped it, then other people can protect themselves too, and everyone can go home feeling a little safer. I don't give them that clean answer, because I don't have one. What I have is this. I saw pieces of something for a long time, and I chose again and again to assemble those pieces into a picture that was less frightening than the truth. That is not stupidity. That is not weakness. That is what love does to a person's ability to see clearly. It edits, it softens, it finds reasons, and I am not ashamed of having loved my daughter enough to do that. I am only sorry it cost us so much. There is a thing I've come to understand about cause and effect that has nothing to do with punishment or reward in any grand cosmic sense. It is simply this. Every choice builds something. Noelle and Lester made choices, one at a time over years. Small, dishonest choices that required larger ones to cover them, and larger ones that required larger ones still. That is how it always works. There is no sudden leap from a person who loves her parents to a person who stands on a ridge and pushes them. There is only a long series of decisions, each one a little further from the person you started as, until the distance becomes total and you can no longer see where you began. I think about that when I think about Eugene, too. He made choices, quiet ones, protective ones, choices that came from love, but that cut me out of something I had a right to be part of. I have made peace with most of that. What I understand now is that intelligence without honesty, even when the dishonesty comes from kindness, still costs something. Eugene's notebooks, his 4 months of investigation kept for me. I understand them. I also know that those months were months I could have spent preparing, deciding, grieving on my own terms. Wisdom, I've learned, is not the same as managing someone else's pain for them. What carries me forward is not the absence of grief. I grieve, Noel, constantly, in the specific way you grieve someone who is still alive but has become someone you don't know. I grieve the Sunday phone calls. I grieve the serious little girl who thought before she spoke. Grief and survival are not opposites. I have found out that you can hold both in the same hands at the same time, and that holding them is itself a form of strength. Not because it feels strong, but because you keep going anyway. I stood at that ridge again in February. My shoulders still hurt. The lake was gray and flat and quiet. I stood close enough to look, which I needed to do, and I thought about what it means to still be here. Not as a miracle, not as anything larger than what it actually is, but simply as a fact. Eugene was beside me. He took my hand. Neither of us said anything for a long time. That is enough. That has to be enough, and on most days, I find that it is.